the next few minutes, I'll show you everything you need to know to use the DJI NEO properly, what hidden features it has, and how to get the most out of the DJI NEO. To make this tutorial a little clearer, it's divided into 13 parts that correspond to the most important features of the NEO. Right at the beginning, you should charge all the batteries. If you only own the drone, you can charge it via the USB-C port on the back. If you have the Flight Mode combo with the charging hub, remove the battery by pressing the button in the center and pushing the battery backwards. Now insert the battery into the charger together with the other two batteries. The charging hub can also be connected via USB-C. Even if it's not connected, you can use this button on the right hand side to check the charge status of the individual batteries. As soon as a battery is fully charged, all 4 LEDs will stop blinking and light up green continuously. Once you have fully charged your battery, reinstall it on the drone by pushing it in with the pins towards the back. You need to activate your DJI NEO right at the start and update the firmware as soon as possible. I'll show you how to do this in a moment. But before that, let's take a quick look at the drone itself. The DJI NEO has 2 buttons. The button at the back is the power button, which you use to turn the drone on and off. The button on the front above the camera is the so-called mode button. This allows you to change the mode for the various quick shots or smart snaps, as DJI calls them. The camera is protected by a gimbal protector for transport. You can remove it by gently pressing it at the top and bottom and then pulling it outwards. The camera is attached to a single-axis gimbal that only stabilizes it for up and down movements. You should always remove the gimbal protector before switching on the NEO. The NEO only has sensors on the bottom, but no sensors on the sides, front or back. If you are not careful, it will quickly fly into a tree, bush or other obstacle and crash. To prevent a rapid crash and major damage, it has propeller guards. These can be easily removed and replaced just like the propellers themselves. I will show you how to replace the propellers in the case of damage at the end of the video. To switch on the NEO, press the power button once briefly and then press it a second time. And the second time you press and hold. As you can see, the NEO activates and searches for a connection. The 4 small LED lights indicate the charging status of the battery. The currently active flight mode also lights up at the front. I'll explain the 6 flight modes of the NEO in more detail in a moment. This is the status indicator. If it lights up green, everything is okay. If not, it lights up yellow or red. For example, when the battery is empty. You switch the drone off in the same way as you switched it on, by briefly pressing the power button once and then pressing and holding it again. Now we need to activate the NEO and update the firmware. To do this, you need the DJI Fly app, which you will also use to control the NEO. To activate the NEO, you have to switch it on. You can now connect the NEO to the app and thus to your smartphone and start the activation process. As soon as the drone is activated, a message will appear at the top of the screen to download the latest firmware. This is also very easy. You download the latest firmware and update your drone. If you've purchased the Flight Mode combo, you may also need to update the remote control. You can also switch on the NEO remote control by briefly pressing the power button once and then holding it down a little longer the second time. As the remote control does not have a display, you use your smartphone as the display. You connect your smartphone to the remote control by clamping it into the upper holder and connecting it with the USB-C cable included. For all those who own an older iPhone, a lightning connection cable is included in the packaging, which you can plug in here at the top. The NEO is now activated and updated. From now on, we can always connect the NEO via the connect icon in the app. There are several ways to control the DJI NEO, with the remote control, the VR goggles, and of course with the smartphone app. The NEO also has a number of predefined flight modes. When using one of these automated flight modes, you can basically fly the NEO without a smartphone and without a remote control. DJI also refers to this as palm control. The NEO takes off from the palm of your hand, flies the predefined maneuver, and then lands on the palm of your hand again. This works surprisingly well. Even if you take off and control the NEO using palm control, I would still recommend connecting the NEO to your smartphone. This simply has several advantages. You can use your smartphone to change settings for the individual modes, see a preview image of the camera, and if necessary, take manual control of the drone. And in an emergency, quickly stop the flight maneuver or initiate a landing at any time. And of course, you can also start a NEO from the palm of your hand when connected to your smartphone. So let's take a closer look at how to control the NEO using palm control. How do you start a NEO from your hand? Use the mode button to select the relevant flight mode. Then place it on your hand with the camera facing in the direction of the subject. Now press and hold the mode button for 2 seconds. Two things are important here. You must no longer move the NEO and the camera must be facing the subject, as the intelligent flight modes require a subject to be captured. If both are given, the drone will take off, start its flight and automatically fly the specified maneuver. After completing the flight path, the NEO will hover in place. Now walk towards it, extend your arm about half a meter below the drone and open your palm. The NEO should now land safely on your hand. If it doesn't work straight away, take a step back and try again. You will see that in most cases this works quite well. However, before you send the NEO on its journey, you should know exactly how it will behave depending on the flight mode, if only to avoid a crash. After all, you need to know where it will fly to be able to estimate whether it will encounter an obstacle. We should therefore take a closer look at the different flight modes. As you can see here, you can choose between 6 different flight modes. The last mode, the so-called custom mode, again allows you to choose between 3 flight modes. If you simply want to try out the NEO for the first time, I recommend the first flight mode Follow. In this mode, the NEO will lock onto a subject before taking off, in most cases this will be yourself, and it will then follow the subject. So if you move away from the drone, it will fly after you. But what you should know is that if you walk towards the drone, it will not fly backwards. It will only fly after you, but will not follow you sideways or from the front. If you have connected the NEO to your smartphone, which I would always recommend, here below under Settings, you can set the distance at which the NEO should follow you, and you can also set the height at which the NEO will follow you. Of course, you should do this before the start. You can cancel the current maneuver, in other words the following, immediately using the stop button. This is an advantage if the drone is about to fly into an obstacle. And by tapping on the icon at the bottom left, you can also quickly take manual control of the drone if required. You can use these virtual control sticks to further correct the flight position of the NEO, and it will then continue to follow you in the new position in follow mode. I will show you how the manual controls work a little later. As with the other intelligent flight modes, the NEO starts recording immediately and automatically in flight. You therefore do not have to start and stop the recording yourself. You can now land the NEO on your hand again as described. If necessary, you can also land it manually on the ground using the virtual control sticks. Although the follow mode works quite well, the NEO has a maximum speed of 12 miles per hour in this mode. If you go too fast, it will lose you and hover in place. The second flight mode is called Dronie. In Dronie mode, the NEO detects the subject and flies backwards, taking a shot as it does so. It then flies back towards the subject and takes a second shot. The result of the Dronie are therefore 2 different shots. When connected to the smartphone, you can again adjust a few settings. You can decide whether the drone should also ascend when flying backwards or whether it should simply fly backwards flat, and you can set the maximum distance. Everything else is the same as in follow mode. The next recording mode is called Circle. As the name suggests, in this mode the NEO flies backwards again, thus establishing a certain distance and then flies in a circle around the detected subject. This can also make for a super cool shot. In this mode in particular, you should of course always check in advance whether the drone could fly into an obstacle when flying the circle, as it will not circle the subject at a great height, but rather at eye level. And as I said, the NEO will not recognize possible obstacles when flying sideways. You can use the smartphone to set the distance from which the NEO should film the subject in a circle. The maximum distance is 20 meters. If you select the rocket mode, the NEO will ascend straight up from the subject and film the subject from above during the ascent. It will take another video during the descent. You will therefore also receive 2 separate recordings as a result of this flight mode. Here you can set the maximum altitude and whether the drone should rotate on its own axis during the ascent and descent. Spotlight is a very simple mode. In the case of Spotlight, the NEO will simply hover in place and film the captured subject. It will therefore turn with the subject but will not fly after the subject. In contrast to the other flight modes, you can also activate a photo mode here, whereby the NEO will always take a photo if the subject remains in the same position for more than 3 seconds. As already mentioned, you can select one of 3 different flight modes under Custom using the smartphone app. Direction track is set by default. With direction track, it's important from which side the NEO is facing the subject when you activate the takeoff. If it's facing the subject from the front, it will establish a certain distance after takeoff and always try to follow the subject from the front. So if you move towards the drone, it will fly backwards. If the camera is pointing at you from the left during takeoff, the NEO will try to follow you from the left. I've noticed that direction track works as long as you walk slowly, but if you are going too fast, the NEO will no longer be able to follow you correctly, especially when flying backwards. Therefore, if it's no longer able to follow you in this way, it could choose a different angle. If the NEO loses you, it will simply hover in place. If it picks you up again later, it will resume tracking. The second mode you can select under Custom is Helix. In this mode, the NEO will fly backwards and circle around the subject. In this case, unlike with the circle mode, it will ascend while circling and descend again. This creates a relatively cool effect. In the app, you can set the distance from which the NEO should film you. And the last intelligent flight mode is Boomerang. And here the NEO will also fly around the subject, but in an oval form. Similar to Helix, it will also ascend and descend again. You can also set the maximum distance in the app. As already described, the NEO will hover in place after completing one of these maneuvers. Now move towards the NEO, stretch out your arm and open your hand under the NEO. It should now land automatically on your hand. In direction track mode, turn towards the NEO and stand still. It will now fly towards you and you put your hand under the drone again. We have already seen that you can also land the NEO manually using your smartphone. The smartphone app also offers a range of other features. Up to now we have initiated the takeoff of the NEO with a long press on the mode button. However, if you have connected the NEO to the app, you also have the option of initiating the takeoff by pressing and holding the start button in the app. In this case, the NEO can also be placed on the palm of your hand, or you can simply start it from the ground or another surface. And you can initiate the landing using the button here on the left. The NEO will then land directly from its current position. You should therefore make sure that the position is suitable for landing. The stop button is used to abort the task currently being performed. That means an ongoing landing or an automatic flight maneuver is aborted. If you're not interested in using one of the intelligent flight modes, you can also control the NEO manually from the start using your smartphone. To do this, switch to manual control mode and initiate the takeoff via takeoff. You will now see the two virtual control pads on the screen again. The NEO is controlled using these control pads like any other DJI drone as follows. If you swipe up on the right cross, the drone flies forwards. If you swipe down, it flies backwards. And if you swipe left, it flies sideways to the left. And if you swipe to the right, it flies sideways to the right. All relatively intuitive. On the other hand, if you swipe upwards on the left cross, it ascends. If you swipe downwards, it descends. And if you swipe to the left on the left cross, it rotates to the left around its own axis. If you swipe to the right, it rotates around its own axis to the right. With a combination of different commands, you can create interesting camera movements in this way and, for example, fly forward and ascend at the same time. You can also control the tilt angle of the camera by dragging this icon with the two arrows upwards or downwards. If you are now using one of the intelligent flight modes, you can use the same controls to adjust the position of the drone or the angle of the camera. In contrast to the intelligent flight modes, in manual mode a recording is not started automatically. This means you have to start or stop a recording by pressing the red circle. You can switch between photo recording and video recording using the icon on the left. And what's particularly cool is that you can also control the NEO using voice commands. To do this, tap on the icon here on the right, which now lights up green. And now you can use voice commands to tell the drone which maneuver you want it to perform. Takeoff. For example, the NEO understands takeoff or land. It understands all the names of the intelligent flight modes, such as follow, dronie, circle, rocket or spotlight. And it also understands commands such as closer, higher or lower. If you don't want to touch your smartphone for the voice commands, you need to activate Voice Wake Up. You can do this here under Voice Control and Settings. Activate the voice command using Hey Fly. For example, Hey Fly, take off. Or Hey Fly and then follow. Don't forget, however, that many of these intelligent flight modes require the drone to detect a subject during takeoff. This means that you cannot start the flight mode from any position. If you want to use the NEO for vlogging, for example, then you will particularly like the next feature. If you activate the microphone here, the NEO will automatically record the audio during the video recording. However, the drone itself has no microphones. Instead, the sound is recorded via the smartphone. And not only that, the NEO also supports the use of the DJI Mic 2 or audio recording via Bluetooth headphones. Under Album, you can then view your videos, and when you download them, the audio recording from the smartphone or the external microphone is automatically added to the recording. And the coolest thing is that the extremely annoying and loud propeller noise is also automatically removed from the recording. And this also works surprisingly well.
This is an audio test with the DJI NEO.
This is an audio test with the DJI NEO. Under Settings, you will find a few more important additional setting options. In addition to the familiar settings for the intelligent flight modes, also known as Smart Snaps, you can adjust the most important camera settings here. However, the options are very limited. You only have the choice between 4K and 1080. Normally, you should always shoot in 4K. Unfortunately, only 30 frames per second are currently available. If you want to take a slow motion recording, switch to 1080 and 60 frames per second. In this way, you can create a slow motion recording of up to 40%, but the image quality will suffer greatly. Under More Settings, you will find a range of additional setting options and information. For example, you can calibrate the gimbal here if it's causing problems. If you've purchased the Fly More combo, you have also received the DJI RC N3 remote controller. The two sticks for the controller are stowed in the underside and can be stored there during transport. You remove them and screw them in. Now plug your smartphone into the top, connect it to the USB cable and switch on the remote control as shown before. The drone can be operated with the remote control in almost the same way as with the app's virtual joysticks. The left and right joysticks have the same functionality as the app's control pads. You can adjust the camera angle using the wheel on the back left. You can start and stop a recording with the rear right button. To start the drone, press both sticks diagonally downwards and inwards or diagonally downwards and outwards. The motors will now start and you can take off. To switch the motors off again, press the left stick down a little longer after landing. You should also remember that you usually control the drone manually with the remote control, so you always have to start a recording manually. Apart from that, the remote control offers you a few important additional features that are not available without it. With the remote control, the Neo can not only fly much further away, it can also fly faster. Only with the remote control, you can switch between the flight modes Normal, Cine and Sport. In Sport mode, the drone flies a little faster, but a little less stable than in normal flight mode. And in Cine mode, the exact opposite is the case. The Neo flies a little slower, but more stable for more stable and therefore more cinematic shots. The remote control also has a pause and return to home button. If you press this button once briefly, the Neo interrupts the current maneuver and stops immediately. If you press the button for longer, the Neo automatically flies back to the registered home point, which is particularly useful if you lose sight of the drone. And the intelligent flight modes also differ slightly when using the remote control from the Smart Snaps, which are available without a remote control. You can select a subject on the display by drawing a frame around it. You now have the choice between Spotlight, Active Track and Point of Interest. In the case of Spotlight, the drone and therefore the camera will always be pointed at the subject. However, you control the flight manually. In the case of Active Track, the Neo will follow an activated subject, and in the case of Point of Interest, the Neo will fly in a circle around the subject, similar to a circle. If you tap on the icon at the top here, in addition to photo and video, you can also select various quick shots. The familiar Dronie, Rocket, Circle, Helix and Boomerang shooting modes are available here. And I think these do not need to be explained again. And the operation with the remote control offers yet another special feature. Via the camera symbol at the bottom right, you can adjust all camera and exposure settings manually, and you can also set an exposure correction. And the three dots at the top right allow you to change even more settings. For example, you can adjust the digital sharpness of the image in this menu. So if you want more manual control and more setting options, you should definitely use the remote control. Once you've taken your shot, there are various options for transferring it to your smartphone or PC. As you may know, the Neo only has an internal memory with a total of 22 GB and no SD card can be replaced. In the smartphone app, you can select the recordings you want to transfer via Album and then click on Download at the bottom right. If the quick transfer mode is activated, the transfer will be much faster. You can also simply connect the drone to your PC via USB-C cable. It will then be recognized as an external drive and you can transfer the video files. To do this, you don't need to switch on the drone. It doesn't even need to have a battery installed. Any audio recordings will also be automatically synchronized and transferred with the video recording. It can of course happen that you crash your Neo at some point and may have to replace a propeller. 2 replacement propellers are included in the packaging. You can easily remove the propeller guards by pulling out the hooks on the sides. Only at the end do you remove the one in the center and then pull the propeller guards outwards. Now use the screwdriver included in the packaging and remove the 2 screws from the propeller. Now you just have to make sure you insert the correct propellers. There is a propeller A for the front right and rear left, and a propeller B for the front left and rear right. You screw on the new propeller, push the propeller guard into place via the hook in the center, and then click the remaining outer hooks back into place. Be careful, the packaging only contains 1 replacement propeller A and 1 replacement propeller B. If you've watched this tutorial before purchasing the Neo, then I recommend the Flight Mode combo, if only because of the additional batteries. You will find a link in the video description. I wish you lots of fun with your Neo. I think you should now know everything you need to know to fly your Neo successfully. If this video was helpful for you, give me a like as feedback. There will be more videos about the DJI NEO, so stay tuned and see you next time.